chosen one. They're absolutely losing their minds trying to figure out who you are. Right now, the people who attacked you are frantically asking each other, who is this person? What are they? How are they still standing after everything we threw at them? They're desperately seeking answers from practitioners, begging entities for information, demanding to know WHO protects you and why their most powerful attacks keep backfiring. By the end of this revelation, you'll understand why that hospital bed is now occupied by someone who tried to destroy you, why money is vanishing from your enemies' accounts as we speak, and why you're about to receive wealth that will silence every doubter forever. The betrayal started with someone you trusted completely. There was someone in your life playing a dangerous game. While they smiled in your face, laughed at your jokes and acted like they cared about your well-being, they were secretly documenting everything about you. Your habits, your vulnerabilities, your schedule, your dreams, all of it was being reported back to a group of people who wanted you erased from existence. This person thought they were untouchable. They believed they could manipulate you indefinitely while serving their real masters. They convinced themselves that you would never discover their deception because you trusted them so completely. They made one catastrophic error. They underestimated what happens when you betray a chosen one. Right now, this double agent is experiencing consequences so severe that they're questioning everything they thought they knew about reality. Their health is failing in ways doctors can't explain. Their family is turning against them. Their money is disappearing through mysterious emergencies. And that's just the beginning of what's coming for them. Here's what makes this betrayal even more sinister. They weren't working alone. This wasn't just one person's jealousy or resentment. What you experienced was a coordinated conspiracy involving multiple individuals who met in secret, planned your downfall, and convinced themselves they could collectively destroy someone operating under divine protection. What they didn't realize is that every meeting, every plan, every malicious intention was being recorded in the spiritual realm. Evidence was being gathered for a trial they didn't know was coming. Charges were being prepared that would soon be filed in cosmic court. The methods they chose to attack you will shock you. When gossip and social sabotage weren't enough to bring you down, this network decided to cross lines that most people don't even know exist. They turned to spiritual warfare, using methods so dark and forbidden that even experienced practitioners warned them about the consequences. They gathered personal items that belonged to you, hair from your brush, clothing you'd worn, photographs where you looked happy, items you'd touched. They used these in elaborate rituals designed to bind your spirit, drain your life force, and transfer your power to themselves. They lit candles over your image while chanting for your destruction. They created effigies of you that they tortured, believing this would manifest as actual harm in your life. Some went even further. They made contact with entities from lower spiritual realms, offering sacrifices in exchange for power to destroy you. Animals were killed in your name. Personal possessions were burned while curses were spoken over the flames. Blood was spilled while your destruction was requested from forces that feed on human suffering. They thought they were dealing with an ordinary person who would succumb to these attacks. They had no idea they were targeting someone whose spiritual protection operates on a level they couldn't comprehend. Every ritual they performed was being reversed in real time. Every curse was being redirected back to its sender. Every entity they summoned was being turned away at your spiritual borders and sent back to collect payment from those who called them. What happened next changed everything. While your enemies were conducting their dark rituals and congratulating themselves on their cleverness, something extraordinary began happening in your life. You started overcoming obstacles that should have destroyed you. You began succeeding in areas where you'd previously struggled. Opportunities started appearing out of nowhere. Your enemies watched in horror as their attacks not only failed, they seemed to be strengthening you. The more they sent against you, the higher you rose. The harder they tried to break you, the more unbreakable you became. The more they attempted to drain your energy, the more powerful your spiritual gifts became. It was like you were feeding on their attacks and converting them into fuel for your own ascension. This is when panic set in among your attackers. They couldn't understand why their proven methods weren't working. They couldn't figure out why you kept getting stronger instead of weaker. They began to suspect that you might be something more than they had originally thought. The truth about what you really are was about to shatter their entire worldview. Desperate to understand why their attacks were failing, your enemies consulted with darker practitioners and made contact with more powerful entities. They offered greater sacrifices and made more binding agreements, promising these forces anything they wanted in exchange for your destruction. What happened next terrified them beyond comprehension. When these entities approached you, they encountered something they weren't prepared for, a chosen one, operating under divine authority, surrounded by legions of warrior angels, connected to a source of power that made their own abilities look like shadows. These dark forces took one look at your spiritual protection and fled in terror. Some were so overwhelmed by the divine light surrounding you that they were destroyed on contact. Others retreated immediately, but not before delivering a terrifying message to those who had summoned them. You have led us to someone we cannot touch. You have deceived us about the nature of your target. Payment is still required. Now these entities were furious and hungry, but since they couldn't feed on you, they turned their attention to the only available source of payment, the people who had summoned them in the first place. Your enemies found themselves being consumed by the very forces they thought they controlled. Among the most devastating betrayals was the discovery that someone in your own family had taken payment to participate in your destruction. The person who shared your bloodline, who was supposed to love and protect you, instead chose to profit from your downfall. This family member provided inside information that your enemies couldn't have obtained any other way. The Obsidian Inner Order isn't for everyone. It's for the ones who walked through hell smiling and came out glowing. You didn't come here to be liked. You came here to remember who you are, and we remember with you. This isn't a community. It's a war room for the spiritually elite, a headquarters for timeline jumpers, curse breakers, and reality benders. Every weekly Zoom call is a live frequency upgrade, where dragons speak, codes unlock, and the veil lifts. You'll get access to elite downloads, energetic technologies, and ancient transmissions that were never meant for the masses. Because let's be real, most people can't handle what you carry. Inside you don't heal, you resurrect, you reclaim, you reign. Click the link in the description. If you're tired of surface-level fluff and ready to sit at the table of the anointed, then welcome to the Obsidian Inner Order, where you become the source. They gave details about your childhood traumas that could be used against you in rituals. They shared family secrets that were meant to stay private. They provided access to items from your past that could be used in spiritual attacks. They even helped coordinate timing for when you would be most vulnerable. In exchange, they received money that they thought would solve their financial problems. They convinced themselves they had valid reasons for their betrayal. Maybe they were jealous of your gifts. Maybe they resented your success. Maybe they felt entitled to what you had because of family connections. What they didn't consider is that when you betray a chosen one, you don't just lose money, you lose your spiritual protection and invite generational curses into your bloodline. This family member is now watching their life disintegrate in ways that seem almost supernatural. The money they received is disappearing through unexpected expenses and emergencies. Their own children are being affected by the chaos they invited into the family line. Their health is declining rapidly. Their relationships are crumbling as the truth about what they did begins to surface. Meanwhile, an even more shocking betrayal was unfolding. When spiritual attacks and family betrayals weren't enough to bring you down, your enemies decided to escalate to physical measures. They hired someone whose job was to deliver the final blow, someone who was supposed to end your story permanently through whatever means necessary. This person accepted the contract believing you were just another target. They studied your routines, learned your patterns, and prepared to complete their mission with the same cold efficiency they'd used on others. They were paid well and given specific instructions about how and when to act. Your enemies believed this would finally solve their problem once and for all. Something unprecedented happened when this assassin got close to you. They felt your energy and experienced something they'd never encountered in their professional career, the unmistakable presence of someone operating under divine protection. The closer they got to you, the more uncomfortable they became. Their usual confidence evaporated, their hands began to shake. An overwhelming sense of dread filled them whenever they thought about completing their mission. It was as if every cell in their body was screaming warnings about the magnitude of the mistake they were about to make. Finally, they couldn't go through with it. This professional killer, someone who had never failed to complete a contract, found themselves unable to harm you. In fact, they began unconsciously working to protect you from the very people who had hired them. Your enemies were learning that even their most trusted weapons become your allies when they encounter your true nature. While orchestrating attacks against your person and your spirit, your enemies also discovered something that drove them to new levels of desperation. You have a massive inheritance coming that includes not just money but spiritual gifts, divine authority and cosmic power that's been accumulating in your family line for generations. They convinced themselves they could steal it through legal manipulation. Documents were forged, signatures were faked, false claims were filed with authorities. Some even attempted to have you declared legally incompetent so they could claim guardianship over your assets. They believed that if they could legally steal what was spiritually yours, they could somehow override divine will with paperwork. They spent enormous amounts of money on lawyers, court fees and bribes, thinking they could corrupt earthly systems to rob you of heavenly blessings. They were so confident in their plan that they had already begun dividing your inheritance among themselves before the legal processes were even complete. What they didn't understand is that you can't steal a chosen one's divine inheritance any more than you can steal the sun's light. Every attempt to defraud you was being documented by spiritual authorities. Every forged signature was creating evidence for criminal cases that were already being built against them. The truth about your real identity was about to be revealed in a way that would shatter everything they thought they knew. Up until this point in your journey, you might have wondered why you kept surviving things that destroyed other people. You might have questioned why their attacks seemed to strengthen rather than weaken you. You might have been confused about why even professional killers couldn't bring themselves to harm you. The answer is about to blow your mind. You're not just a chosen one in the general sense. You're what spiritual traditions call a seraphim in human form, a being of such high spiritual frequency that you're essentially operating as a divine agent in physical reality. Your consciousness exists partially outside the realm where normal spiritual attacks have power. This is why their magic didn't work on you. This is why their curses backfired. This is why their hired practitioners kept failing. This is why even dark entities fled when they encountered your energy. You can't curse an angel. You can't hex divine light. You can't bind someone who operates under cosmic authority. When your enemies were desperately trying to figure out who and what you are, this is what they were sensing but couldn't understand. They knew you were different, operating by rules they didn't recognize, but they made the fatal mistake of thinking they could overpower divine authority with street-level dark magic. It was like trying to fight the ocean with a water gun, and now they were about to drown in the consequences. While your enemies were plotting and scheming in this reality, you were receiving protection and guidance from sources they couldn't even imagine. Every night while you slept, you were accessing other dimensions, receiving downloads from spiritual guides, and being briefed on their plans before they could execute them. Your ancestors were working overtime to shield you from harm. Generations of powerful spiritual warriors had been waiting for exactly this moment to demonstrate their protective abilities. Every attack your enemies made was being intercepted by forces that operate beyond the physical realm. Every curse they sent was being redirected by ancestors who refused to let their bloodline be harmed. You were never fighting this battle alone. You had an entire army of spiritual protectors working on your behalf, and they were getting increasingly angry at the audacity of people who thought they could harm someone under their care. Meanwhile, you were also receiving strategic information through your dreams and meditations. You were being shown your enemy's plans before they could implement them. You were being given countermeasures before you even needed them. You were being prepared for victories you didn't even know were coming. This unlimited access to higher dimensions is what made you unstoppable, why you were always one step ahead, why their surprise attacks never surprised you. Your consciousness wasn't limited to this reality, and that terrified them because they were beginning to realize the true scope of what they had gotten themselves into. Their spiritual attacks weren't just failing, they were backfiring with devastating force. Their attempts at legal theft were being uncovered by authorities. Their hired assassin had switched sides. Their dark entities were consuming them instead of you. They finally understood. They hadn't targeted an ordinary person. Panic set in as they realized they had declared war on someone operating under divine protection. Fear consumed them as they understood that every attack they had made was creating karmic debt that would have to be paid. Desperation drove them to even more extreme measures as they tried to find a way out of the spiritual trap they had created for themselves. Some attempted to flee to other countries, thinking distance would protect them from the consequences of their actions. Others tried to find more powerful practitioners who could somehow reverse what they had done. A few even attempted to make deals with different spiritual forces, offering greater sacrifices in exchange for protection from the karma they had created. Nothing worked. They were trapped in a web of their own making, and every attempt to escape only made their situation worse. The spiritual laws they had violated don't recognize geographical boundaries. The cosmic justice they had triggered doesn't accept bribes or negotiations. The divine protection they had challenged doesn't forget or forgive attacks on its charges. They were about to learn that the universe has its own justice system, and it was about to render its verdict. What happened next can only be described as divine justice operating with surgical precision. Each person who had participated in the conspiracy against you began experiencing consequences that were perfectly tailored to their specific crimes against you. The betrayer who had fed information to your enemies found themselves completely isolated. Their family turned against them as the truth about their double life emerged. Their friends abandoned them when they realized the depth of the deception. While you were getting stronger and healthier with each passing day, your enemies were making frequent trips to medical facilities with conditions that seemed to defy medical explanation. The sickness they had tried to send to you through their rituals was manifesting in their own bodies. Some developed mysterious illnesses that doctors couldn't properly diagnose. Others experienced sudden onset of conditions that had no apparent cause. A few suffered mental health crises that required immediate hospitalization. Every symptom they were experiencing was directly related to the spiritual attacks they had launched against you. The irony was perfect. The weakness they had wanted you to experience was draining their own energy. The confusion they had tried to create in your mind was clouding their own judgment. The pain they had wished upon you was now their constant companion. Medical bills were piling up as they sought treatment for conditions that had spiritual rather than physical causes. No doctor could help them because the source of their suffering wasn't in this realm. It was karmic consequence manifesting as physical reality. What your enemies hadn't considered is that many of their spiritual attacks also constituted actual crimes in the physical realm. Identity theft for ritual purposes, theft of personal property for spell work, fraud in multiple forms, conspiracy charges, in some cases much more serious offenses that authorities were just beginning to uncover. Federal investigators had been quietly building cases that would shock everyone involved. Digital trails that your enemies thought they had covered were being uncovered by experts. Financial transactions were being traced back to their sources. Witnesses were coming forward with information about meetings and plans. Evidence was accumulating that painted a picture of a coordinated conspiracy that crossed multiple legal boundaries. Some faced charges that could result in decades in prison. Others were looking at financial penalties that would bankrupt them for life. All of them were discovering that thinking you're above the law because you're operating in spiritual realms doesn't protect you from earthly consequences when those spiritual activities involve criminal behavior. Search warrants were being executed, arrests were being made, court dates were being scheduled. The same people who had thought they were untouchable were finding themselves in handcuffs, reading charges they never imagined they would face. Your enemies were learning that divine justice operates through both spiritual and legal channels. The most devastating consequences of all were the ones that would affect your enemies' family lines for generations to come. When they decided to use blood sacrifice and ritual magic against you, they didn't just create karma for themselves, they activated spiritual consequences that would flow through their bloodlines like poison. The entities they had summoned and couldn't control were now permanently attached to their families. Children and grandchildren who had nothing to do with the attacks on you would now grow up under spiritual oppression because of choices their relatives had made. Family lines that had once been blessed were now cursed. Bloodlines that had once carried positive energy were now infected with darkness that would take generations to cleanse. The negative energy your enemies had generated was flowing through their family trees, creating patterns of dysfunction, illness and failure that would repeat until someone in their lineage was strong enough to break the cycles they had created. Meanwhile, your own family line was experiencing the exact opposite effect. Generational blessings that had been dormant for decades were suddenly activating. Spiritual gifts were awakening in family members who had never shown any psychic abilities. Divine favor was flowing through your ancestors to reach you and would continue flowing through you to bless future generations. They had tried to curse your lineage and ended up blessing it while destroying their own. The irony was perfect, and the justice was absolute. As your victory became undeniable, something beautiful began happening in communities you didn't even know existed. Other gifted people, other chosen ones, other individuals with divine connections had been watching your situation unfold, and they were amazed by what they witnessed. Word was spreading about the person who had survived what should have been unsurvivable. Stories were being told about the individual who turned every curse into a blessing. Legends were forming about the chosen one who demonstrated what divine protection looks like when it operates at full power. Your name was being spoken with respect in circles where such recognition actually means something. This spiritual recognition was translating into real-world opportunities that seemed to appear out of nowhere. Connections were being made with people who understood exactly what you are and what you're capable of achieving. Doors were opening that had previously been invisible. Resources were becoming available that perfectly matched your needs and goals. You were stepping into a level of support and abundance that reflected your true identity and purpose. The same community that had tried to destroy you was being replaced by one that celebrated and supported your divine mission. Your spiritual gifts, the same abilities your enemies had tried to steal, were becoming the source of extraordinary wealth in your life. The universe was ensuring that you were compensated not just spiritually, but materially for everything you had endured. The money that had been spent trying to destroy you was returning to you multiplied exponentially. Some of this abundance was flowing through your spiritual work as people recognized the power and authenticity of your gifts. Some was coming through investments and opportunities that seemed divinely orchestrated. Some was arriving through the very inheritance your enemies had tried to steal, which was now larger than ever as compensation for their attempts at fraud. All of it was evidence that attacking a chosen one doesn't just fail, it guarantees that the person you attacked will be blessed beyond measure as the universe corrects the injustice you attempted to create. Your enemies had invested in your destruction and were now watching helplessly as that investment paid dividends that made you wealthy while leaving them completely broke. The money they had lost was becoming the foundation of your financial freedom. Looking back at everything that had happened, the pattern became crystal clear. Every attack against you had ultimately served to strengthen your position. Every betrayal had revealed who your real allies were. Every attempt to steal from you had resulted in you receiving even more than you would have had originally. Your enemies had unknowingly become the instruments of your elevation. Their spiritual attacks had forced you to discover and develop abilities you might never have known you possessed. Their legal challenges had resulted in you gaining protections and resources you wouldn't have had otherwise. Their attempts to isolate you had connected you with communities where you truly belonged. They had intended to write your ending, but instead they had authored the most powerful chapter of your beginning. Every method they used against you had backfired so completely that they had become the unwitting architects of your success. The slander they spread had been too weak to damage someone operating under divine authority. The lies they told had been too transparent to fool anyone who mattered. The evidence they fabricated had been too obviously false to stand up to scrutiny. You're not just anyone. You're not just surviving. You're not just getting by. You're a real one. You're a chosen one. You're someone whose destiny cannot be derailed by people operating from jealousy, fear, and spiritual darkness. Your enemies threw everything they had at you, and you're still standing, in ways that leave no doubt about who you really are and what you're capable of achieving. What you've experienced so far is just the foundation of what's possible for your life. The victory you've achieved over these particular enemies has qualified you for even greater battles, higher levels of service, and more powerful demonstrations of divine authority. Your proven ability to overcome coordinated spiritual warfare makes you eligible for missions that require that level of tested strength. The wealth that's flowing to you now is just the beginning of the abundance that will be entrusted to your stewardship. The recognition you're receiving is just the start of the platform you'll be given to help others. The protection that's been demonstrated around you is just a preview of the authority you'll carry as you step into your full purpose. Your enemies did you a favor they never intended. They provided the exact resistance necessary to develop the spiritual muscles you'll need for everything that's coming next. They gave you a story of victory that will open doors, inspire others, and demonstrate your qualifications for greater assignments. Told you, the war is over. You won, not just this battle, but the entire conflict. Your enemies are not just defeated, they're destroyed. Your betrayers are not just exposed, they're isolated. Your attackers are not just unsuccessful, they're consumed by the very darkness they tried to use against you. You're thriving, you're rising, you're becoming everything you were always meant to be. Welcome to your victory, chosen one. The fact that you're still here, still standing, still growing stronger, proves beyond any doubt you're a real one.